Good evening to each of you, for this is the day, another day that the Lord has made, and we should rejoice and be glad in it. I certainly want to welcome each of you on tonight to another Wednesday night of our virtual Bible study here at the First Baptist Church of Salisbury, Maryland. Listen, I don't know about you, but I am so thankful to God that I was able to wake up and see one more day. I'm of the age now in which I no longer take life for granted. In fact, this pandemic should have taught all of us that we can be living one day and then be dead and gone the very next day, which is why all of us who God hath allowed to see this day should have a reason to thank God. All of us should be thankful that he provided for us all day long. We should be thankful how he has shielded us from seen and unseen dangers all the way up to this very present hour on tonight. God has been good to all of us. I'll say that again. God has been good to you. I hope that's your testimony on tonight. And I believe you are in the right place at the right time as you are here with us virtually on this Wednesday night, which is why I am so glad that all of you have taken a few moments to join in with us tonight as we continue in our series for the month of September entitled Family Matters. Again, Family Matters. Throughout this month, people of God, we have discussed the importance of family. I've asked each of you to assess how we were building our homes. I've asked each of you to decide in your mind and evaluate how you were constructing your families. I challenged all of you to take a personal inventory of your families and be honest and ask yourselves the question: do you really like what you see in your family? Because if we were all honest on tonight, all of us can admit that there are certainly some opportunities for growth in all of our families, which is exactly why on last week we looked at lessons in overcoming dysfunction in the family, which was part 1 on last week. And on tonight, we are going to continue in that thought, overcoming dysfunction in family, part 2. Last week, just to recap real briefly, last week we looked at several things. Because listen, it is no secret to any of you that there is some level of dysfunction in your family. In fact, all of us know that our families have some issues. In fact, most of our families have some deep generational issues. And if you can't be honest about that, then the health of your family is not important to you. Because far too often, we are treating open wounds with Band-Aids instead of closing the wounds with stitches and allowing them to heal properly. Too many of our families are simply trying to mask the wounds instead of treating the wounds and caring for them, which is why, again, I tell everyone out there on tonight, some of us just don't need Jesus in our families, but we also need some therapy, because a dysfunctional family normalizes and becomes desensitized to dysfunctional behavior, therefore causing patterns of detrimental behavior to continue generation after generation. But the good news my brothers and my sisters, is that there are lessons that can be learned to help guide us through the dysfunction that exists within our families. But also, do not forget that this process, it's never ending. Each day, it takes work. But I think on tonight, during our time together, we will challenge each of you, and it will encourage us all to move further in the right direction in reestablishing the importance of family. And certainly it should help us overcome some of the dysfunction that exists within our families, which is exactly where we were on last week, where we were looking at a biblical narrative of a dysfunctional family. Our attention was in the 37th chapter of Genesis as we studied the first 11 verses. It was an introduction to the family dynamic between Joseph and his father and his brothers. And on tonight, we will continue in chapter 37, but we are going to begin with verse 12. Again, overcoming dysfunction in the family, part 2. And again, we are still in chapter 37 of Genesis. But before we begin on tonight, let's recap a few lessons that we discussed on last week on how to overcome dysfunction in the family. We talked about how there could not be any favoritism shown, as we saw the danger of parents showing favoritism, because it does not bring the family closer together. It only divides the family and pulls them further apart. On last week, we talked about the importance of effective communication because it makes strong families. Families have to be able to talk to each other. Families have to be able to listen to each other. In fact, it's okay to allow room for disagreement, but there should always be a mutual respect between each other and also some accountability. We talked about how families should be intentional about spending quality time with each other, because not all time that is spent together is quality time. We talked about the importance of family praying together. We talked about how families should encourage one another. We talked about how families should pray for each other. We talked about how families should express appreciation for one another. We talked about how families should be committed to each other. We talked about how families should be concerned for each other. We talked about how one needs to be accountable for your actions, and always remember that you are either part of the solution or you are part of the problem. And last week we saw how the relationship between Joseph and his brothers was reaching a boiling point. Joseph was his father's favorite, and as a result, his brothers had hatred for him. Joseph also didn't help matters any, as he shared with his family about 2 dreams that he had. Both dreams were representations of his family bowing down to him, which is exactly where we left off last week. Joseph, and talking about lessons learned, Joseph made the mistake of not using his words wisely. And we're going to start right there. Joseph, unfortunately, made a miscalculated error in which he did not use his words wisely. God gave Joseph the dreams to be used for encouragement and strength for his future. They were not meant to be used to discourage his own family. And before I move on, let me drop this in someone's spirit since we are here. We can either build up or destroy the lives of others with our tongues. Because Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says, the power of life and death is in the tongue. We often wound the closest to us with our words because we fail to consider how they may make others feel. That's what happened to Joseph. He was sharing with his brothers this dream that he had. They already had a hatred for him, but the dream simply just made things worse. Because people in our families often have to grow up with insecurities that are created because of evil words that we have spoken to them. Sometimes my brothers and my sisters, there may be some truth in your words, in the words that you say, but because of how we say it, the words cause others so much damage. In fact, husbands block out the words of their wives because it comes across to them as often nagging. Sometimes wives block out the words of their husbands because their husbands don't make them feel inadequate. They don't value them. They take them for granted. Children block out the words of their parents because their parents always potentially belittle them or compare them with each other. Church, our words matter because some of us know the exact trigger words to use against other people, especially in our family. Some things you just should not say, which is why we have to figure out the best way to communicate with each person in our family, because you cannot talk to everybody the same. I wanted to drop that in your spirits before we moved on to verse 11. So now let's pick up in that verse 11. Again, we are in Genesis chapter 37, and I'll be coming from the NIV translation on tonight. Again, we are in our series, Family Matters. Our thought on tonight will be Overcoming Dysfunction in the Family, Part 2. Genesis 37, let's start with verse 11, if you don't mind. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So again, here we have Joseph's brothers being not only jealous of Joseph, but they are angry with Joseph. And over the next several verses remaining in this chapter, we will discover the lengths that often your family will go through when generational dysfunction and hurt is ignored, but rather passed down from generation to generation. I'll say that again. Over the next several verses within this chapter, up until the conclusion, we will discover the lengths that often your family will go through when generational dysfunction and hurt are ignored, but rather passed down from generation to generation. So on tonight, we are going to go through verses 12 through 20. So we've already read verse 11. Now let's go to verse 20. And again, we are in Genesis chapter 37. And our thought on tonight is Overcoming Dysfunction in the Family, Part 2. So let's look at verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, Joseph replied. So look what happens next. Jacob sends his favorite son, Joseph, off to be alone with his brothers to check on them. Jacob is sending his son into a very dangerous situation, considering Joseph's brothers are angry with him. They have hatred in their hearts for him right now, because we already know that from verse 5. Again, Joseph's brothers hated him. Jacob is oblivious to the fact that Joseph's brothers had this hatred for him, or maybe Jacob is aware of their hatred for Joseph, but he doesn't think they are capable of acting on it and hurting him. But I would presume, because of his love for Jacob, I would think that he did not know about their hatred for Jacob, because if he did, I can't imagine him knowingly sending his favorite son into a dangerous predicament. But either way that you choose to look at it, whether you believe Jacob knew that Joseph's brothers hated him, or whether you believe that Jacob did not know, regardless of which way you believe it, the situation is extremely problematic, because ultimately Jacob is not in tune with how his family is feeling. Don't miss that. Jacob is not in tune with how his family is feeling, because one might suggest, how could Jacob not know that his other sons had a deep hatred for Joseph? Because the favoritism appears obvious to everybody when you look at it, but maybe it didn't appear to Jacob, because far too often some of us never see the wrong in anything that we do. Often we as parents can be so prideful that we don't even recognize the mistakes that we make when it comes to parenting. And also, secondly, sometimes if parents are not actively engaged with their children, they can easily miss emotional triggers. Jacob had no idea that his sons were even feeling this way about Joseph. Again, sometimes when we are not actively engaged with our children, not actively engaged with our families, we can miss emotional triggers. We can miss our children's cries out for help. We can miss the moments when our family needs us most because we are not actively engaged and in tune with how they are feeling. They give us signs, but we are in our own worlds and we do not pay them any attention. And that, my brothers and my sisters, is dangerous. When you are not actively involved in parenting your children, you have no idea what they are capable of, because you cannot make assumptions as to how your children feel. But we must be a part of their lives by talking to them and actively listening to them. How often do you ask your children how they are feeling? How often do you ask your children, how was your day? How often are you talking to your family members? Are you talking to your siblings? Are you talking to your spouses, calling them not to ask them for anything, but just calling them and doing a wellness check. And not just a physical wellness check, but taking a mental wellness check with them. Just checking in to see how things are going. Because my brothers and my sisters, parents, what a shame it is when TV, social media, and music is raising our children. Our kids are learning life skills not from us, but they are learning them from each other. We are so out of touch with our children, and you are often, grandparents, you are often so out of touch with your grandchildren. They are doing everything and anything, and we have no idea what's going on. We walk around and are oblivious to the pain that we have caused each other, because our family communication is terrible. It is often broken. Come on, saints of God, let's be honest on tonight. Families don't even talk anymore. They don't even have dinner together anymore. Everybody is off doing their own thing in separate parts of the house. And then when our family is in the same room, everybody is on their respective electronic devices, not even talking to each other. This one has an iPad, the other has their cell phone. Your child is running around with a cell phone as young as 1 year old. Nobody is communicating with each other. How do we live in the same houses with each other? And our primary way of communicating with each other is through text messages instead of talking to one another. When you are out of touch with how your family is doing, you never know what they are capable of. Oh, come on, somebody. That was good right there. Because parents send their children to school and then get mad with the teachers and the school when they tell you that your child is really not the perfect angel that you thought they were. Your children don't listen. They cuss like sailors. They are disrespectful, but you have no idea because we are not actively engaged emotionally in their lives. It is not the job of the school system to raise our children. That starts at home. Do not blame them for how your kids act. In fact, during all of this virtual learning, you know what we found out? You have found out exactly who your children are, because many of you saw with your own eyes your children's school habits. But I said all of that to say this: we have to be more in tune with the feelings of our children, and we have to be more in tune with the feelings of our other family members. Because if there is anybody that should know that his children hate one of their brothers, you would have thought that a father would know. You would have thought that Jacob would have known this, but he sent Joseph get out to be with his brothers and not even was aware of all the hatred that they had for their brother. And for those who think that maybe Jacob did know, he still has done nothing to address the problem. Jacob still turned a blind eye to the dysfunction. But it all just points to their extreme lack of communication as a family. Saints of God, if we just took the time to talk to each other and be more respectful of one another, so many issues would be resolved in our families instead of just letting them fester on, because little problems will always manifest themselves into bigger problems if they are left unaddressed. So in verse 14, it says, "So he said to him, Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? Joseph replied, I am looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Joseph now goes after his brothers, but he cannot find them. Joseph looks around and does not see his brothers anywhere. Then a man sees Joseph wandering around and asks Joseph, what are you looking for? Then Joseph responds by telling the man that he is looking for his brothers. And then Joseph asks the man where he could find them. The man tells Joseph where to find them. So now Joseph knows where they are, and Joseph is headed in their direction. But look what happens in verse 18. Verse 18 says, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Woo! As Joseph approaches his brothers, they recognize him from a distance. And the reason why they were able to recognize Joseph from a distance was because he was probably wearing the distinctive and fancy robe that their father had given him. Because remember that robe, it was certainly not the attire for a shepherd that was about to do some work. But the climax of that verse is that before Joseph gets to his brothers, they had come up with a plan together to kill their own brother. All of their emotions simply exploded at this point. And as a result, they had a plan to make them feel better. But can I help somebody on tonight? Responding purely off of your emotions is never good. Joseph's brothers had harbored all these negative emotions toward him for years. These emotions have festered year after year to the point where they can't even control their own emotions anymore. Saints of God, don't ever let your emotions have control over you. Successful families cannot allow negative emotions to be harbored year after year after year, because the more they harbor, the stronger and the stronger these emotions get, and the more uncontrollable they become. Because look what happens if families harbor negative emotions. The plan was not just to rough up Joseph. It was not just to beat up the brother, but these brothers planned to kill Joseph. And it appears that all of them reached the decision together. Not one of them at this time, as Joseph was walking up, disagreed with the plan. And they came up with the plan to kill Joseph very quickly. Can you imagine just how much hate that they had for their brother to come up with the idea to murder him? Look at verse 19. We're almost done. They say, here comes that dreamer. Mocking Joseph, they said to each other, here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Here it is. They decide to throw him in. They come up with this elaborate plan to kill him, throw him in a pit, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. They came up with this plan to kill Joseph, throw Joseph in a pit, and then blame his death on a wild animal. If all of the brothers are able to keep their mouths shut, then it looks like this is going to be a foolproof plan. But what are the chances of that happening, that everybody collectively can keep their mouths shut? Joseph's brothers just didn't want to kill Joseph, but they also wanted to kill his dream. I'm done for tonight, but next week we will look at what happens next. Are his brothers successful in carrying out their plan? Does everybody keep quiet about the plan? Does Joseph overcome the dysfunction that exists within his family? And if he does, how is he able to do it? So again, join me next week as we continue looking at overcoming dysfunction in family. Tonight was part 2. Next week will be part 3. Let's pray on tonight. God, we first start by giving thanks in all things, because we serve a God that is always in control. God, we thank you for each person who is viewing with us on tonight. God, hear their prayers. God, answer their prayers. God, instill in us the strength that we didn't think was even possible to have. God, give us all the patience and the endurance to wait on you. And God, while we wait, God, give us a peace that surpasses all of our understanding. God, bless the words on tonight. God, bless our families. God, continue to restore our families. God, open up the lines of communication within our families. God, you know what each of our families need. God, show yourself strong in the life of every family on tonight. And now as we close this prayer, God, give us all the assurance that everything we've asked for in your name and according to your will, it will come to pass. May all of God's children say amen. Before we log off, if you have been blessed by the word on tonight, if you have been blessed by any ministry here at the First Baptist Church, we encourage you to sow into our ministry. You can go directly to our website and find out the various ways in which you can give. And also, if you look on the screen right now, you will see the various ways in which you were able to bless and sow into the life of the First Baptist Church here in Salisbury, Maryland. I hope you were blessed on tonight. I certainly was. Stay encouraged, families. Family is important. Again, the whole entire month of September, we are talking about family matters, the importance of it. Stay tuned for next week, Overcoming Dysfunction in Our Families, Part 3. I'm out. I love you. God loves you. And there's nothing that you can do about it.